All right, today we're tackling one of the biggest questions out there, but we're not going to use philosophy. Nope, we're coming at it with a pretty stunning answer straight from the world of fundamental physics.
You've definitely heard this one, right? It's jumped out of sci-fi movies and into some really serious debates. The idea that everything you can see and touch is all just part of some ultra-advanced computer program.
And look, it's a wild and fascinating thought, but a really solid argument, one that's built on the physics of information and energy, suggests the answer might just be a hard no. So let's dive into why that is.
Okay, so before we can poke holes in the theory, we first have to get why it's so convincing to so many people in the first place. What's the core idea here?
It really just boils down to a numbers game. The logic goes something like this. If any civilization, anywhere, ever, gets advanced enough to create super convincing simulations of their past, well, they probably wouldn't make just one. They'd make tons of them, billions maybe. So, if that happens, the number of simulated people would just completely dwarf the number of real people. And that means, just based on pure odds, it's way more likely that we're one of the simulated ones.
And this quote right here, this is the absolute key. The whole argument stands on one giant assumption, that you can create these unbelievably complex worlds for basically next to nothing, at a negligible cost. But what if that core idea, that it's all cheap and easy, is just fundamentally physically wrong?
And this is where physics just walks right into the room. See, the paper this explainer is based on points out a massive problem for the simulation theory, a hard physical limit on the resources you'd need. You can think of it as a fundamental glitch in the whole argument.
To really get this, we have to define a term, base reality. Physicists call it R0. This is it, the real deal, the foundational universe where everything exists. It's the ultimate hardware that any computer would have to run on. And here's the most important part. It has a limited, finite amount of stuff, of information, of energy. It's not infinite.
And this shows you a hierarchy that you just cannot escape. A simulation has to run on a computer, and that computer has to exist inside the base reality. You just can't build a computer that's bigger or more complex than the universe it's sitting in. The simulation is always a smaller piece of its host.
So here's the bottom line, the one unbreakable rule. No matter how fancy it is, a simulation is always informationally smaller than the reality that's running it. It's a law you can't negotiate with. And that simple fact is the first big domino to fall.
So, how does this actually play out in the real world? Well, it all comes down to some hardcore physical laws about information and energy, laws that no simulator, no matter how advanced, could ever hope to break. This brings us to something called the state space tax, thanks to a rule called Landau